I've not done this talk before. I've sort of made it for you, effectively, and this might be the first and last time it's ever experienced. But we'll see, especially with the first few slides. I'm not quite sure how it's going to go down, but it's something I've just been thinking about a lot around Neolithic culture and how we look at it and view it. And also I just thought if we're going to do this, I know it's a sort of live performance situation, I'll get Alexis to come and sort of play a little bit of music under two stories, true things that happened to me in stone circles that I felt made some incredible connection to the Neolithic, really, and really made me think about things in a different way. So I'm just going to talk about that world and maybe the pitfalls of it even a little bit. It's not going to be a long talk. Could be, like I said, it could be very short after I've made my opening statement. So this is, as you know, for me personally, kind of the worst place in the world for 4 days a year, I have to say. I've been to Glastonbury a number of times, but I've found it actually quite a hellish place, and it really does my nut in. And I know that's probably not what you're expecting to hear, but for some reasons, I went last year, not this year, and it was very, very hot, and it was full of people. This is the old person stage called the Park, where people my age sort of hang out and look at sort of vaguely heritage bands. But it just did my head in, all the people there, and then the heat and so on. I just couldn't bear it. But I do watch it on telly, and I love watching it on telly. And I was very, very excited to see a band this year. I thought, these people could sound quite interesting, and you might know them. They're called Hurling or whatever. It's called Healing. And I watched them, and within minutes, I just thought, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but for me it represents everything that's bad about the culture that people are interested in, this sort of pre-Christian pagan culture. It was incredibly serious. It took itself far too seriously. It used a lot of quite dodgy sort of runic imagery, and for me it felt like it was a sort of about racial purity more than anything else, quite seriously. And I just felt that the whole thing was just a sort of terrible expression of sort of Nordic culture in its worst sense, and just kind of quite seriously played in sort of neo-Nazi sort of imagery and ideas around the purity and blood purity. So I was very upset to see it, and it reminded me actually of some terrible attacks in America on Native American pictographic sites in New Mexico, when white power was, as you can see there, was graffitied over the pictograms. And so there was a spate of vandalization, of people vandalizing these sites in America a few years ago. And it got me thinking about what I'd done in the past around this culture, and whether I was sort of not to blame for it necessarily, but whether I was part of that process, because it was quite puzzling, but also quite disturbing to see that band play. Of course, I'd made this piece of work. It's called Sacrilege. I made this in 2012. It was, in a sense, I made it for a number of reasons, but it was during the Olympic year, and there's a lot of talk about the Olympics and about art projects for the Olympics and so on. And I wasn't commissioned by the Olympics to make it. It was made for something else. It was actually in Glasgow, which is where this photograph is taken. But then it became adopted by the Olympics, and I just thought, well, that's fine, because I think, like a lot of sporting events, they're so nationalistic, and also they're so monolithic, and they take themselves so seriously. And I felt that any country worth its salt should enjoy its history and its culture and be able to, in a sense, poke fun at itself. So Sacrilege was made, and in a way it was, now as I understand it, maybe I could sort of big it up and say it's a sort of anti-fascist artwork in a sense, because it's definitely not something that band I just showed you would understand necessarily about how you treat Neolithic culture. But in a way it was also to make children interested in Neolithic culture and archaeology. I was very interested in that sort of interaction. Again, this is in Glasgow. And so I made something that, in a sense, was sort of took away the pomposity of the Olympics and the Olympic movement and sport in general a lot of the time, and was also something that was really about being able to touch Stonehenge, for it to be able to tour Britain, for it to just appear for one day in your local park and then disappear. All those ideas about getting in touch with it, but also to play with it. And in a sense, we were playing with the culture, we're playing with the history. Because, of course, the thing about Stonehenge is that even though we might have ideas and theories, there's no real... We know it's some kind of massive clock, effectively, but we don't know what people really did there. We don't really know what language they spoke, how they spoke, what music was played, what the rituals were like. So it's an incredible space for artists. It's an incredible space where you can actually put your own opinions on, and as do the public. And I thought that was really interesting. That's interesting for us to think about as a nation. Our identity is almost dictated by this site. Stonehenge really is, when we think of Britain, people think of Stonehenge, and yet it's a mystery. And I thought that was really interesting about how our identity is effectively a mystery, the mystery of Stonehenge. And that in itself was something where there's a space for everybody to come and enjoy it and have their own ideas about themselves, but also have their own ideas about Britain. So in the book that is for sale here, which if you buy it, they're all signed, most of them are, I'll happily dedicate it to any of you. There's a chapter and it's called Stonehenge as a Mirror. And I think that's what it is. It's a mirror to us in terms of how we see ourselves as individuals, but also how we see ourselves as a country. Also, there's so much, because there's all this space to work in, there's all this potential for hilarity. So this is a T-shirt I made. And I was going to sell it at Stonehenge, and I never did in the end. I wish I had, because the merch at Stonehenge is very, very lame. But so I never got round to that. But the other thing about Stonehenge is that it's always on our minds. It's the most, in a way, it's the most contemporary building in Britain, or structure. It's always in the news. Like every fortnight, every 2 weeks, there's a story about Stonehenge, isn't there? Some discovery or theory. And so it's continually in our minds, and it's continually updated and contemporary. And I think a lot of, I really believe that archaeology is really a study of the present. It's not a study of the past. It's really a study of how we see ourselves now, rather than how we see people in the past. And so for me, Stonehenge is how we interpret ourselves and see ourselves now. So I really wanted this place for misbehavior. And I also wanted a place where people could go to and enjoy equally, effectively, adults and children. And it was weird because this is in Wales, quite close to where some of the early stones were taken from. This is in Preston, at the Preston Guild, which is every 20 years. There's a big sort of guild party in Preston. And then this structure went around the world. It went to Australia, where it was so hot that people were burning their feet when they were going on it, but people had to go on it. And in a way that I felt that was more about Australians wanting to connect to Britain and British culture, maybe. They had to go on it. And it went to Paris and Hong Kong, whatever. It went on tour, effectively. And everywhere it went, the reaction was the same. This are some photographs taken very close to here, actually. They're near the Millennium Dome and in Greenwich. What I discovered very quickly was that if you can't really, when it's inflated and the press want to turn up, you have to get some other people to go on it, otherwise they'll make you go on it and bounce up and down and look like a total idiot. So this is a group of gymnasts from a children's gymnastic class in Kentish Town came along and basically performed on it. And they're sort of flying about effectively. And so sometimes you get these images that actually have a spiritual dimension to it, like this boy sort of levitating effectively or flying through the space. And in a sense, that's where maybe the spiritual element of this work comes from, is in images like that. Having said that, it's not that I'm not against the spiritual element of this culture at all. Compared to those images of that terrible band I showed you at the beginning, I went to event. I was asked to make an event at Stonehenge in 2018, I think it was, and some druids turned up unannounced, which actually, weirdly, the archaeologists were quite excited by, because I think what happens with some archaeologists, some of them are, I don't know if you know any archaeologists, they're actually really into this sort of behaviour, because it gives them some kind of window into maybe what did happen there, because we don't know. when they see people come in and react in a certain way, they like it because it animates the space. And so at this event at Stonehenge, we allowed sort of closer access to the stones. We couldn't go in the stones. English Heritage just wouldn't allow that. But you could go close to the stones, and here you could get actually up to what's called the slaughter stone, which of course is not about sacrifice at all. It's just it fell over, so it felt that it was a space for sort of sacrifices. So you get things like this happen, which actually is, for me, this guy, he's called Merlin, and he came and did a little service. But going back one image, you see these people here. It was actually quite a kind of funny group of people in the sense that no one was wearing the same clothes. They were sort of taking it seriously, but not too seriously. They all had their own thing going on, and he made this prayer thanking English Heritage, of all people, for like the 100th anniversary and looking after the stones for 100 years. So it's actually, but it was weirdly moving in that space. And if anyone, you've all been to Stonehenge, you know what it's like there with the sky. It was a very windy day, but it was bright with big clouds in the sky. It was kind of amazing. So this for me was like a really important moment when I realized how moving this small service was. I'm just going to show a little clip from a film I made, just going on that idea about confounding expectations. A few years ago, I made a film with a group of young people in London about rave culture, effectively, but really about Britain in the 80s. And I showed them footage from 1986, an amazing documentary made by the BBC of the Wiltshire Police operation to prevent people going to Stonehenge. And this is a section from it. And at one point in this documentary, there's a break, and I ask a question. And I want you to answer it in your head as well, because one person answers it, but I want you to sort of think about what the answer could be to this event. Unfortunately, I appear in this film because it's based around me giving a talk in a school in North London. But let me get it up. Let's play it. It's a year they took a pilgrimage to Stonehenge to celebrate summer solstice. From the mid-80s onwards, they were prevented in this quest, and so Stonehenge became a huge pressure point. The tension is building in the countryside, and people are being frustrated, and their civil liberties as they see them are being stopped, as this documentary from 1986 shows.
At midday, more than 300 people leave the camp and make their way onto the A36 in the direction of Stonehenge. At this stage, they still don't know how far the police will allow them to go. About 5 miles from Stonehenge, the convoy is stopped in its tracks. Waiting in the middle of a dual carriageway is a force of several hundred police.
This is the police announcement.
No, I'm front of here! Stay here, let's get some guitars, let's have a party!
What law is there in the country to stop us from going to an ancient monument, a religious, a place of worship that does mean? Get this stuff cleared up as soon as possible.
Fair enough, you've got 10 minutes, okay.
I was supposed to meet somebody at the last Festival of Peace and Understanding, and they didn't turn up. Another picture. Here I am, and this is all I've got. I'm a refugee. I'm an exile in my own country now, yeah. I'm going to apply for refugee status to the British Refugee Council. I used to work with refugees, and this is what happened to people in third world countries. This is what happened to people in Latin America. This is the new right taking over. And that's serious. Yeah.
In about 20 seconds, these people appear on the screen. And I just want to ask if anyone would be able to predict what they're going to say about the young people.
They aren't going to like it, because it's different. And they're just going to think that they're just disrupting everyone, and maybe because it's not their way of living, so they won't agree with it.
Talking about South Africa, aren't they?
About
apartheid out there with the blacks. Well, we got it with our own people. We're just as bad. This is a police state now. That's what it is. Here, we got no freedom of speech, and you got no freedom in this country now.
I don't want no bugger hassling me or chasing me about, telling me what I can't do and what I can do. It's a free country. Everybody do what you please.
But they can't just have freedom just because they want it. They have to contribute something to society.
Doing something for their country.
Lying over there, drinking, smoking. Who paid for it?
They're tired.
Oh, the poor things. So am I tired, going to work and bringing up 3 children. I'm tired. I'm not drowning my tiredness in drugs and alcohol.
They've not
cigarettes.
got drugs. They've not got drugs. Can you prove they've got drugs? Can you prove they've got drugs?
No,
Go
I
over.
can't. But I can see them with their cans of beer and their cigarettes and everything.
They're
and
entitled to
someone's
have a
paid
beer.
for them.
Don't you have a glass of beer?
Well, we all drink.
I have a glass of beer.
I need to pay for it.
Doesn't matter where the money came from. They want a drink, so they're having a drink. And if they wanted a bloody drink, I'd give them the money to give them a drink.
Go on then, give them your money. They're not having mine.
I willingly give it to them. I'll share what I've got with anybody. He can be the tramp in the street. It doesn't bother me. He's as good as I am, until proved different.
You're very brave to say that, because I would have said the same thing. You'd expect someone of that age and that other man as well to be anti it, but those men fought in the war, probably. You know, they would have grown up and been very aware in the 1930s what happened to people in certain countries if they didn't conform. This is a year after the strike, and I think people probably had enough by then of what the strike had done to the... That wasn't that well edited, was it? The strike being the miners' strike. But the point is... Let's not have that image of me, actually. This is to come. But the point is, actually, maybe, again, we're talking about sort of fascism and anti-fascism, but if they were indeed soldiers, which they probably were, especially the second guy had the sort of bearing of one, he would have, he fought for a country that didn't do that to its own people, because he'd seen what happened in Europe to countries that did that to their people, victimised people and arrested them, put them in prison because they were different. And so it was an interesting generational shift there, especially with that woman arguing against the young people. That's more or less the voice of Margaret Thatcher there, arguing about them, whereas he has a more liberal, nuanced view of that and about civil liberties. Anyway, it is surprising. I'm sure a lot of you thought they were going to hate it. I mean, I did as well, so there's nothing wrong with that. So, for the first time ever, I'm going to speak or talk with a bit of music underneath me, and Alexis and Daniel are going to play. These are 2 stories, both of them true in the sense that they're things that happened to me in stone circles, and they have a sort of semi-spiritual but also sort of uncanny time-travelling aspect to them. So, we're at West Kennet Long Barrow, as you can tell from this image. I don't know if any of you have been there, to the West Kennet Long Barrow. It's one of the great places to visit for Neolithic sites. It is, as it says, a burial site. And I used to go there as a child. It's near Avebury, as you'll see in a minute. And you can walk inside it. I did a photo shoot there a few years ago, hence the T-shirt, where I got pictures like this. This is just from outside, all these poppies. But this is inside. There's this sort of back wall, effectively, but whenever you go in there, there's always people who are doing something. There's some sort of ritual going on, something happening. And so, like I said, it's within view of Avebury. You can see it from the top of the mount. Which always, for me, was something interesting about Avebury, was that in a picture like this, it looks like they were trying to get to the clouds, trying to find sort of the heavens, basically, with it. So I was, a few years ago, I was on the mound. That's not me, by the way. It's just another human being. And I was lying down, and I was more or less asleep. And I heard this sound. And I looked up, and overhead was like the largest plane I've ever seen in my life. Black, just very, very low, like it was going to land in a field 2 or 3 miles away or something. Couldn't quite work out what was going on. And then it occurred to me that there are around these sites, and around Stonehenge, as I'm sure you know, many military bases. So what was that plane doing? It wasn't clear. Then I realized, this is in 2009 when I had this experience. I realized that plane very possibly was taking bodies from Afghanistan to the UK to repatriate them. So there I was, lying on basically on a burial mound with dead people would have been underneath it, dead warriors, chieftains, and watching potentially a plane traveling over me full of dead bodies about to be repatriated. So what happened when these planes landed? They were taken. Families would be reunited with the coffins, and then very famously the bodies would then be driven through Wootton Bassett, which is about 12 miles from Avebury and from the stone burial chamber. So that's one story. Maybe a bit of a downer actually, but it just occurred to me that time had collapsed in on itself at that point when I was lying on basically I was lying on a burial chamber looking at potentially dead bodies fly through the sky from a country thousands of miles away, from a war thousands of miles away. The next story is a little bit lighter. The best night of the year for me is the Saturday before Carnival, Notting Hill Carnival. If you go to Kensal Rise, you'll see the steel bands all rehearsing in the streets for Panorama, which is the big competition. And you can walk up and down Kensal Rise and see all the bands rehearsing with dancers, and it's a very relaxed atmosphere. I don't really like Notting Hill Carnival itself for the reasons I don't really like Glastonbury, in the sense that it's usually too hot and there's just too many people there. But this night is much more relaxed. So you can go from band to band and you can hear one band playing as you're watching another band, and it's just continuous entertainment effectively. And in terms of visually, it's one of the most amazing things to watch a large steel band perform. I'll just show you a little clip of one. So we're going to leave Notting Hill. The next day, that's the end of the evening at Notting Hill. The next day, I thought, I'm going to try and find the closest stone circle to London, as I felt it was. And it's one I'd never been to before. It was, I forgot the name of it now. Rollright Stones, of course. Sorry, the Rollright Stones in Oxfordshire. I don't know if any of you have been to that one. It's like another one of those great sort of stone circles is next to a very, very busy road. You can always get killed visiting it. This is the Rollright Stones at across the road from it. There's an amazing view down a valley at sunset. Again, like at Avebury or any of the other sites that are free to enter or where you can have access to the stones, there's always something going on in the way that you never really see much going on at Stonehenge. It's, which is purely a tourist experience. So this is that evening, and I wanted to wait till it got dark, or for a number of reasons. Mainly because if you take a photograph of a standing stone at night with a flash, it always looks really impressive. I always love how they look. The first time I visited Stonehenge, inside the stones itself was at night. And so that was, for me, very exciting, taking flash photography at Stonehenge. So these are more stones. This is actually from Avebury. I went one evening to take photographs at night of them. They seem just totally different when you take pictures like this. Also, the texture of the stones is something I think that's is quite interesting when you do that. So there I was just about to leave, actually, Rollright Stones, and they opened up the gates, and then cars came coming, loads and loads of cars were coming, and I couldn't work out what was going on. And people were getting equipment out. In the distance, you see Chipping Norton, and that might even be the Alex James Festival from, just a warning, I'm sorry I had to mention that to you, but there was something going on. But having said that, this area is a dark skies area, which is very close to London to have one, maybe the closest one. And people are actually getting out telescopes to look at, because there's a clear light, to look at the stars, basically. And a young woman got out a telescope, and she was from the Astronomical Society of Chipping Norton. And she said, look through this. And I looked through it, and I saw that. Saturn, with the rings. The most mind-blowing experience. It looked like that. It didn't look like that, but it looked like that. But to be honest, that was enough. That was the most amazing thing. And I just felt, wow, people for tens of thousands of years have been coming here to look at stars, to try and work out the solar system, to try and use it almost like the internet to work out what was going on with time and with seasons and with storytelling. And there we are doing the same thing 10,000, 8,000 years later, and it's still an absolute thrill. So that's the second story. The Rings of Saturn at the Rollright Stones. So this is more or less the end of the talk. I don't even know how long I've been going on for, but when I made Sacrilege, I always had in mind the music and just the idea of Aphex Twin as a person. You know how musicians can be really inspiring? They don't even have to make music sometimes. It's just who they are and how they behave and how they are in the world and how they present themselves. There's a few like that, and he's clearly one of them, isn't he? Let's face it. And so I was thinking of him, and I just thought, God, your music would go so well on this bouncy castle, bouncy, this structure. People would love to bounce around to it. And then Alexis and I were talking about doing some music for this last part of the talk, and he said, why don't we just play an Aphex Twin track? And I thought, you totally get it as well, basically, because I didn't even tell you this, and you suggested a track. So we're going to do, for the first time ever, sort of live, I don't know what it is. What is it? We're making a video, sort of, aren't we? Making a promo. Yeah, we're making a promo. This is basically the end of the talk. It's like a 2-minute section from a film I made, and it shows you the sort of joy of of Sacrilege. we go. Thank you very much. Thank you.